Today, we're diving into what feels like a major political earthquake happening in Australia. There's this controversial figure, someone who's been on the fringes for a long, long time, who is suddenly making a huge comeback. And what this reveals is some pretty deep cracks in what it means to be Australian today. We're going to unpack what's going on and what it might mean for the country's future. So let's get right to it. What on earth is behind this really startling political shift? It all kicks off with a bit of a puzzle. How does a political figure, who for decades was more or less a marginal voice, suddenly see this massive surge in support? I mean, how does that even happen?
Well, the analysis we're looking at points a finger directly at one person, politician Pauline Hanson. Now, she's been a controversial voice, pushing anti-immigration policies for years. But now, her support numbers are being called just incredible. And that's a huge signal that something fundamental and maybe uncomfortable has been brewing in the public mood for a while.
Okay, so first up, let's just take a look at the actual nature of this political comeback itself. And wow, the contrast here is just night and day. For 30 years, Pauline Hanson's whole platform was pretty much dismissed as divisive. But today, the conversation is completely flipped. More and more Australians are looking around at the country's problems and starting to ask, hang on a second, maybe she had a point all along. But, this isn't happening in a vacuum. The analysis suggests it's being fueled by this feeling that there's just no other choice, no viable alternative to the current government. People are really unhappy with the leaders of the major parties. And honestly, it kind of mirrors a global trend we've seen with figures like Nigel Farage over in the UK. And that really gets us to the heart of the sentiment that's driving all of this. This growing idea of, you know what, maybe she did have a point. So this feeling, it's apparently being built on two, let's call them cracking pillars, a really pressing economic crisis and a cultural crisis that's getting deeper and deeper. It's that moment where your day-to-day anxieties about money and bills start crashing into these much bigger questions about who we are as a nation. And if you want to understand the economic pressure, just think about this number. $1.2 million. As our source points out, that's not for a house. No, that was the recent sale price for a single driveway in Sydney. I mean, if that's not a symbol of a housing and cost of living crisis that's completely out of control, I don't know what is. Then you've got the cultural side, and the analysis really zeroes in on this feeling. The speakers talk about this backlash against what they're calling political correctness and, get this, suicidal empathy. That's their term for a sense that a well-meaning attitude of accepting everyone has actually led the country into, as they put it, a big mess. Which, of course, leads us right to the central idea that ties both of these anxieties together, what they're calling the assimilation argument. You can pretty much boil this entire argument down to this one very direct message from the source material. If you aren't willing to adopt the values of this country, then don't even bother coming. It's a message that used to be seen as pretty harsh, but apparently it's finding a much, much bigger audience now. And to define what this really means, one speaker shares a personal story from when they were a kid in Indonesia. They talked about being taught to cover their shoulders, to use their right hand, to respect the call to prayer. The point they're making here is that this kind of active cultural adaptation is what should be expected from everyone who's new to a country. Okay, now, the conversation takes a really important turn. It grounds this whole political debate in the real-world experience of one group in particular, and it highlights something they describe as a community's deep fear. The source brings up the Australian Jewish community as a case study. They're basically framed as the poster child for the very assimilation they've been talking about, a community that came, integrated, contributed in massive ways to every level of society and completely embraced Australian life. And yet, this quote just voices this profound sense of being let down. Despite being, in their own words, so much part of the fabric of Australia, there's this growing feeling that the very country they helped build is now a place where they're no longer accepted. And this isn't just a feeling. It's not just anecdotal. The analysis points to this really stark data. While the Jewish population is only 0.5% of Australia, they are on the receiving end of the majority of hate crimes. That just shows you how disproportionate the hostility they're facing really is. So this growing anxiety, it's apparently leading to actual, concrete action. The analysis reveals that many people in the community now have a plan B, which is a shocking plan to leave the country they've always called their home. And this quote, it just provides this heartbreaking historical context for why a plan B would even exist. The speaker describes this pattern of being expelled from wherever they settle as this recurring trauma in Jewish history, and they say they've always sort of had their bags packed ready to go.
So finally, what does all of this mean for the entire country? Well, the argument being made is that Australia is standing at a really critical crossroads.
The speakers start pointing to other nations as, cautionary tales. They're looking at the social divisions in the UK, in France, in Canada, and they even point to the super fast transformation of Iran 47 years ago, before the regime, to argue that Australia is absolutely not immune to going down a similar path of deep societal fracture. And this is the final warning they deliver. The belief is that the kind of fundamental regime-level change that seems impossible can happen way, way faster than anyone thinks. And they're saying that some of those early warning signs are already there. And so after digging into all of this, we're left with this powerful, unanswered question. As the nation's values are clearly shifting, is this some kind of necessary course correction? Or is Australia heading down a path that leads to even deeper division? The big takeaway here is this incredible tension right at the heart of modern Australia, a nation that's really grappling with its identity, its past, and what its future is going to look like.